As Fred used to say, and the beat goes on, they just recently passed last week a new consent decree in Chicago. What are your thoughts on that?
What's the content of it?
Police brutality.
But they're supposed to. This is what the Chicago Police Department is supposed to not do. Is that kind of what this is about? These consent decrees.
It is.
They're supposed to limit their brutality. Is that the idea of them?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the one hand, I would look at it this way. On the one hand, when they are forced to sign consent decrees, it's a reflection of the struggle of the people having put things in terms of. Mic is off? It's on? Anyway, the people have actually, it's not that they did it out of the goodness of their heart or they woke up one day and said, oh, we've been brutalizing and murdering a lot of people. Let's sign an agreement that we're not going to do that as much anymore. No, it's more that they recognize that the degree and the ways in which they've been doing this has kind of exposed something very basic about their whole system, and it has aroused the anger of a lot of people, including not only the people that they want to brutally keep down, that's one thing, but also other people like in the middle class and so on who want to cling to the illusion that this is a society of justice and fairness and all these kind of things, but who find it harder and harder to do so in the face of these killings one after the other, and we saw, for example, in the Laquan McDonald thing. It's just, let me say one thing. When I was doing up the list of people killed for this presentation, I kept feeling badly because, well, this one should be included and that one should be. But there's so many people that you can't include all of them. And I just want to make clear, it's not that I'm unaware of all. It's just that there are literally thousands of people. And that's the real striking thing is the list goes on and on. There are just so many, and it's seemingly every day that there's another one. Or if it's not the police, it's these Zimmerman types. In Florida, you all probably saw about this. I think it was also in Florida, this stand your ground law. I'll get back to this point, but I just wanted to say this. This stand your ground law. Where I don't know if you all saw this, but there was a thing where there was an altercation in a parking lot, and this guy, this white guy in Florida has a gun, and he's harassing this woman in the car because the car is parked in a handicap zone or something, and takes it upon himself to act like a pig, and so the boyfriend or whatever, this woman comes out and pushes the guy to the ground, and would be the end of it, except the guy pulls out his gun and kills him, while lying on the ground. This kind of whole thing is of a piece with what the police do. And now, of course, when you have, Trump and, unreconstructed white supremacists like Jeff Sessions is the chief law enforcement officer in the country who's trying to do away. See, I told you I'd get back to it. He's trying to do away with all these consent decrees, So the point is that there's a certain atmosphere they're setting, and in Chicago they have a Democratic administration, with Emmanuel who's all tied in with Obama and everything, and they're trying to act as if they're paying some attention to this, but it won't. On the one hand, like I said, it's a certain recognition that a lot of people are angry about this. On the other hand, these consent decrees, while they may, in a certain limited way temporarily cause them to be a little more careful, it won't change anything fundamental because of everything that, I was talking about in terms of the role of the police. And look, here's the situation. You've got a whole section of people, in particular youth, Latino youth and black youth, and in the country, in the inner cities, who, like I was saying, back in the days of when masses of people like black people were living in the rural South, working on cotton plantation, tobacco plantations, or whatever, even after the slavery ended, that was like vital to the economy. And then, as you all know, after like World War I, but especially more so after World War II, millions of people, black people, left the South, kind of on the one hand, the positive thing of hoping they could find a better life, and the negative thing of getting away from the really concentrated, oppression in the South, the sort of naked brutality. And for a while, people, I've made this point before, but it's important to understand this a little bit in terms of like why things are the way they are right now, specifically. And so a lot of people got jobs in, even well-paying jobs after a while, even though they were stuck for a long time in the, Carl can talk about that, working in the steel plant, and all the people who, black people who got hired and then never got out of the shit jobs in the factories. But still, there was a opening for a lot of people to get hired in the auto plants in Detroit, or the, some of the meat packing here, I think, and the steel plants in the south side of Chicago. It used to be thousands of people working there. Gary, Indiana, I think, had one of the largest steel plants in the entire world back in the 60s or whatever. And almost all of those things are gone. And so first they went, a lot of the capitalists moved their stuff to the rural South, where they could hire people more cheaply, and then they moved it to Mexico. They have the plants. They set up the maquiladores, I think they call them. They set up on the border in Mexico, and then where they're paying people even less, exploiting them more. Then they move from there to places in Asia. And so what's happened is a lot. The youth coming up have no prospects of any kind of that kind of employment that people coming after World War II had some opportunity to get into, and they just. So what does the system do with youth for whom it has no future and no prospects? It contains them. It robs them, like I said, of any decent future, contains them, and then promotes in various ways the whole idea. Contains them violently. That's why we're talking about police murders and consent decrees. So violently contains them, and violently. And I remember when I was living in Chicago back in the 1970s. Actually, I lived in Maywood, but there was a whole phenomenon. Did I say something wrong? Oh, I see. Okay. Well, anyway, that's where I lived for a number of years back in the 70s, and there was a whole phenomenon where, the what was it called? The gang intelligence unit that they had would, infiltrate the gangs and then set up gangs to fight each other, and then, when they would bust somebody, they would take them and from one gang or set and drop them off in the territory of another one to get shit going, and I remember back in the days of the Black Panther Party, when it was headed by Fred Hampton, and he was trying to work with some of the gangs, and then the FBI sent a letter, to Jeff Fort, who was the head of the Peastone Nation, saying that the Black Panther Party had a plot to assassinate him and so on and so forth, to try to set up this stuff. So this is the kind of stuff that they do. In other words, here was a revolutionary force that didn't have the science that was needed. It was sort of had one foot in reform and one foot in revolution, the Black Panther Party. But it was a very advanced force for that time. We all learned a lot from them, those of us who were around then. So I just want to be clear about that. But, they were trying to win some of these youth who were caught up in the gangs to become part of the revolution. And then this is the conscious way the government, the FBI and so on, worked to prevent that. So they have a lot of ways and then they set up these youth. After a while, the thing gets going on its own. You get into these conflicts, and then, the whole thing of, first of all, a thing of revenge. It's a never-ending cycle where, you killed my nephew or my kid, now you have to die, then it comes back the other way. So that's one thing. But also, if you've taken away everything from people and they have no future, people are going to find a way to try to do something that expresses, in however wrong ways, expresses their feeling that they're worth something. No matter how messed up what they're doing might be, it's and this is something that's left to people, was to form street organizations, and then a lot of it, like I said, is imitating the whole system in the first place, and the ways of thinking, the ideology of the system. But you get into it, it takes on a life of its own, and then pretty soon you're deeply into it. And when you're young, you both get drawn to it, but you also can get forced into it. I know many people had to try to send their kids away, so that they wouldn't get forced into the gangs. But it also has an attractive force. It's a way of having meaning, even though it's really messed up. But it's a way of having meaning. And let's face it, compared to revolution, if you just want to look at it, things in the very short term, it's easier. Like we're talking about a really big thing of taking on this whole system and doing a lot of work to get to the point where you could actually have a chance to win. Well, if you got a certain mindset and a certain thing that you're into, going down the street and shooting somebody who's on the wrong block is easier. In the short run, it's easier. It doesn't require you to make big changes. It's what's been left to you. And, that's why this stuff has to be really struggled with hard and really met deep down where people really feel and struggle hard over it, about what should your life really be about. Look into a lot of people who are into the stop the violence stuff. I know I'm getting far afield here, but this is important, I think. A lot of people are into stop the violence stuff. They have good intentions, but at least to some degree, and some of them, they end up working with the police and everything, because they don't understand, and this has to be really brought home, that you're not going to get these youth out of this unless you have a whole different way you're coming at that really speaks to the whole thing they're caught up in, whether they really know that or not yet. You can't just come to them saying, stop the violence, and do what? Let's be real. Stop the violence and do what? Work for chump change all my life for a job that then goes away anyway. And listen. There is not a single sphere of life in this society. Now, you all know this, but I got to say it anyway, in which black people do not get the dirty end of the stick. And not a single thing. I was reading an article in the New York Times about the changing economy. A lot of these industrial jobs I was talking about are gone. And this applies also to people from El Salvador and other things. But there's a whole history of black people in this country. Puerto Rico also. There's a whole history which we can get into. But there's a particular history of black people in this country. And I was reading this article in the New York Times, and it's the changing economy. And it was talking about the loss of industrial jobs and the shift from industrial work to service work. People directly interacting with the public and sales. And just put another thing in the picture. I was reading some statistics that somebody, did some research on. And that 80% of the industrial production jobs in the world are now done in the third world, if you include China. So that tells you a lot about where everything is gone. Most of the clothes are made in Bangladesh. Seafood is done in Thailand. I mean, it's just they're Haiti, Pakistan. This is where most this country is sitting at the end of the food chain. All these people, the coltan for your cell phone is mined by people under terrible conditions in a place like the Congo. So, all this work is gone because it's the nature of the system. They can exploit people much more ruthlessly in these conditions where they messed up these countries. And don't even tell me about, it's better than not having a job at all. If we didn't go in there and do that, they wouldn't have anything. Bullshit. There's lots of raw materials to lots of people. You could have a whole different economy that didn't exploit people if you had a revolution. So I don't want to hear your crap about how if we didn't exploit them, they'd be even worse off. But anyway, this article I was reading in the New York Times, it made the point that this shift from industrial to service work in this country has hit black men particularly hard because while a lot of people, and they're talking about white people, let's face it, who go into these stores are willing to interact with black women but not so willing to interact with black men. Now, good if the black women have the jobs. Let's just be clear about this. This is not a thing against the black women at all. But what is the point here? They've created this whole image that I was talking about through the culture and everything. And it's why you have the thing in Starbucks in Philadelphia and Lake Merritt in Oakland. See, I grew up in the Bay Area. I know about Lake Merritt in Oakland. A lot of people go there and hang out. Black people, white people, whatever. And somebody calls the police on some black family because they're barbecuing with charcoal briquettes, which the city of Oakland has a thing against for environmental reasons. They call the pigs on them. Okay, why? Because people have gotten this image that's been consciously created. I mean, look, a lot of the youth are in messed up stuff, okay, but there's also been a conscious effort to portray all these youth as a bunch of savages. So everything, it's all the way this system operates. It's just like you're not going to change it with consent decrees or calls on people to stop the violence. You got to change it with a revolution. And you got to go deep with these youth, deep and hard with these youth about, what is really worth living and dying for. Let's get right down on the ground with what is worth living and dying for. If you're going to fight and die, at least let's get to the point, we have to get into the science of it and why we can't just jump the whole thing off now. But let's get to the point where at least if you're going to fight and die, let it be for something that will leave the next generation coming along a much better world, rather than what they've got you caught up in now. And, we can understand why they're caught up in it, but we got to go deep and hard to fight about, make your life count for something that really would be meaningful to people that you do care about, whether you act like you care about them or not. You see them out there. I see the gangbangers out there with their little kids rolling around in strollers. Don't tell me you don't care about anybody else. We got to go deep and hard to get to where people really feel and struggle with them about what is worth living and dying for. Look, I have to say one other thing. I know I'm going all over the place here, but just let me say this and then we'll get to the next question. I get really mad when people say, well, you're all just talking about revolution, you're going to get people killed. People are getting killed all over the place, all over the world, including right around the corner right now, for nothing, for no good reason. And we are trying really hard to do this in a scientific way so that people don't die unnecessarily. Now, let's be honest. You can't make a revolution. You can't go up against this thing and defeat them and nobody's going to suffer and nobody's going to die. Okay, let's be honest. There's no good point. In fact, it works against everything we need to be going for if you go up and lie to people and tell them some easy way to do this. But at least let's not have it be for nothing. Let's not have it be only to keep the same thing going that generation after generation. Your kids are going to come up and face the same thing or worse than what you're going through, whether it's the police or someone that just like you who's going to do them in. And, so we're really working very hard to be very scientific so that, yes, people are going to need, when it comes down to it, to fight and die, but at least let's not have it be stuff that doesn't count for anything and really works against what we need to do. At least let's make it count for a future that's better for all the people in the world, the great majority of people in the world who are suffering terribly under this system, including for all the violence that's brought down on them, and for absolutely no good reason and completely unnecessarily. So consent decrees are not going to solve the problem.